This is the story of a young girl. After sharing good news to her friends, they planned and buried her alive. Watch till the end. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light spilling across the silent village. The air was thick with the scent of the earth, damp from the evening dew. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howled, a long, sorrowful cry that faded into the night. In a small mud house at the edge of the village, a girl named Amarachi lay awake on her mat, staring at the ceiling. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was the moment she had prayed for, the moment she had cried for. It was the kind of miracle that happened only in stories, but somehow, it had happened to her. For years, she had known nothing but suffering. Born into a family that barely had enough to eat, Amarachi had grown up watching her mother toil in the sun, selling vegetables by the roadside while her father struggled to find work. Hunger was a constant companion, and the sight of her younger siblings crying themselves to sleep had hardened something inside her. Life had been cruel, but she had never lost hope. Then, as if the heavens had finally heard her cries, everything changed. It started as a simple message on Facebook. A man named Desmond had sent her a friend request. His profile picture showed a tall, handsome man dressed in a suit, standing in front of a shiny black car. She hesitated before accepting, but curiosity got the best of her. The conversation that followed felt like a dream. Desmond was kind, soft-spoken, and genuinely interested in her life. He told her he was from Nigeria but had lived in the United States for years. He had a good job, a house, and most importantly, he was looking for a wife. At first, Amarachi thought it was a joke. A man like this, interested in a poor village girl like her. It seemed impossible. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and Desmond remained consistent. He called her every day, sent her money to support her family, and made promises that seemed too beautiful to be real. Then came the day she would never forget. Amarachi, Desmond's voice had been filled with excitement over the phone. "I want to marry you. I want you to come to America and be my wife." She had clutched the phone so tightly that her fingers ached. "Are you serious?" she whispered, her voice trembling. As serious as life itself, he had laughed. "I'm already making the arrangements. In a few months, you'll be here with me." Tears streamed down Amarachi's face as she fell to her knees. This was it. This was her moment. The moment she had been waiting for. That night, she could barely contain her joy. She had to tell someone. She had to share this good news. And so, the next day, she gathered her closest friends, Chinelo, Ifeoma, and Ngozi, under the large mango tree behind her house. These were the girls she had grown up with, the ones who had shared in her pain and suffering. If there was anyone who would celebrate with her, it was them. Or so she thought. "I am going to America," she announced, her voice filled with excitement. "I'm getting married to a man who loves me, and soon, I will be living in the US." For a moment, there was silence. Then, forced smiles spread across their faces. "Wow!" Chinelo exclaimed. "That's wonderful news. You are so lucky." Ifeoma added, though her eyes held something dark beneath the surface. Ngozi hugged her tightly, but the embrace felt cold. "God has truly blessed you." Amarachi was too blinded by happiness to notice the way they exchanged glances. Too overwhelmed with joy to see the envy that flickered in their eyes like candle flames. That night, as she lay in bed, dreaming of a new life across the ocean, her friends sat in the darkness, whispering. "She cannot leave us behind," Chinelo hissed. "If she goes, she will never look back," Ifeoma added bitterly. Ngozi's voice was calm, but deadly. "Then we must make sure she never leaves." The plan was simple. Ruthless. Final. A few nights later, under the cover of darkness, they came for her. "Amarachi," Ngozi called softly, knocking on the wooden door. "Come outside, we need to talk." Still half asleep, Amarachi rubbed her eyes and opened the door. "What is it?" she asked, confused. "It's urgent," Ifeoma said, glancing around. "We cannot talk here." Trusting them completely, Amarachi followed them into the night, unaware that she was walking towards her doom. The path led into the thick bushes outside the village, where the trees stood like silent witnesses to the evil about to unfold. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked, frowning. Ngozi turned, her face unreadable. "Just a little further." Then, before Amarachi could react, Chinelo grabbed her from behind, her fingers tightening around her throat. Ifeoma covered her mouth to silence her screams, and Ngozi raised a shovel. The first blow cracked against Amarachi's skull, sending stars exploding in her vision. The pain was blinding, unbearable. She tried to struggle, but they were too strong. The second blow came, then the third. Darkness swallowed her whole. And then, silence. With grim determination, they dug a hole deep enough to bury her. "She will never leave us now," Chinelo muttered as they rolled her lifeless body into the grave. The earth swallowed Amarachi, burying not just her body, but the dreams she had carried for so long. They covered the grave, wiped their hands clean, and walked away as if nothing had happened. The village slept on, unaware of the horror that had taken place beneath the silver glow of the moon. But the dead do not rest easily. And Amarachi's story was far from over. The night was heavy with silence as the three girls walked back to the village, their hearts pounding in their chests. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets only the spirits could hear. Ngozi was the first to break the silence. "No one must ever speak of this," she said firmly. "If anyone asks about her, we say she ran away." Chinelo swallowed hard. "What if someone finds out?" "No one will," Ifeoma snapped. "No one saw us, and no one will ever know." They reached their homes just before dawn, slipping into their beds as if nothing had happened. But even as they closed their eyes, sleep refused to come. The weight of what they had done pressed down on them like a heavy stone. By morning, the news of Amarachi's disappearance spread through the village like wildfire. Her mother searched frantically, running from house to house, her voice cracking with desperation. "Have you seen my daughter? Please, she didn't come home last night." Chinelo, Ifeoma, and Ngozi played their roles well, shaking their heads and offering fake concern. "We don't know where she went," Chinelo said. "She told us she had a surprise for us, but we never saw her again." Her mother wept, her wails echoing through the village. Days passed, then weeks, but there was no sign of Amarachi. Some villagers whispered that she had run away, eager to escape poverty. Others believed she had been taken by spirits. But beneath the earth, something stirred. The night was darker than usual. The wind carried an eerie chill, rustling the leaves in the forest where Amarachi had been buried. The earth, once still, trembled ever so slightly. Then, a single breath. A cough. Fingers twitched beneath the soil. And then, in a burst of raw, unexplainable force, Amarachi's hand broke through the surface of the earth. She was alive. Her head throbbed with pain, her vision blurred, but her heart still beat. Weakly, she clawed her way out of the grave, gasping for air as she emerged from the dirt. Tears mixed with blood and mud as she collapsed on the ground, shivering from the cold night. She remembered everything, the betrayal, the blows, the darkness swallowing her. But she wasn't dead. No. God had spared her. Slowly, painfully, she dragged herself through the trees, guided only by the distant glow of the village lights. She was too weak to stand, too weak to cry out, but she had one thing burning in her heart: revenge. As she crawled, a sudden realization struck her. Desmond. He must be waiting for her. He must think she had abandoned him. With all the strength she could muster, Amarachi moved forward, determined to return home. And as the village slept, unaware of the horror that had unfolded, the girl they had buried alive was coming back. And she was no longer the same. Amarachi crawled through the thick bushes, her body screaming in pain. The world spun around her, but she forced herself forward. Every inch she moved was a battle against the darkness threatening to pull her back under. The night air was cold against her skin, mixing with the blood and dirt that covered her. She could barely breathe, barely think, but one thought burned in her mind: she had to get home. She had to let them know she was still alive. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. Dawn was approaching. The village would soon wake. With the last bit of strength she had, Amarachi pulled herself onto the dusty path leading to her family's hut. The small house stood in the dim light, its door slightly open. She could hear the soft cries of her mother inside. Her mother. Tears welled in Amarachi's eyes as she forced herself forward. Her fingers dug into the dirt, her body trembling with exhaustion. Then, just as the first rays of the sun broke through the sky, she reached the doorstep. Summoning the last of her strength, she raised her hand and knocked weakly on the wooden door. There was silence. Then footsteps. The door creaked open, and her mother stood there, wrapped in an old cloth, her face streaked with dried tears. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Jesus," she cried out. "Amarachi." Amarachi tried to speak, but her voice was nothing more than a whisper. Her mother fell to her knees, grabbing her daughter, her hands trembling as she touched Amarachi's face, as if making sure she wasn't seeing a ghost. "My child," she wailed. "They said you ran away. They said." Amarachi collapsed into her mother's arms, the world fading into darkness once more. When Amarachi woke, she was lying on her mat, covered in a soft wrapper. The scent of herbs filled the room, and her mother sat beside her, dabbing a cloth against her forehead. "Amarachi," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Who did this to you?" The memories came rushing back. The hands that had grabbed her. The shovel crashing against her skull. The betrayal. Chinelo. Ifeoma. Ngozi. The names burned in her mind like fire. Her body shook, rage filling her chest. They had tried to kill her. They had buried her alive. But she was still here. And they were going to pay. Slowly, she turned to her mother, her voice hoarse but steady. "Mama. I know who did this." Her mother's eyes widened. "Tell me, my child. Who?" Amarachi's fists clenched. "They will regret ever thinking I would stay dead." Amarachi sat up slowly, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through her skull. The room swayed for a moment, but she steadied herself. There was no time for weakness. Not now. Her mother held her shoulders gently. "Tell me, Amarachi. Who did this to you?" Tears burned behind Amarachi's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "Chinelo, Ifeoma, and Ngozi," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "My own friends. They lured me into the bush and buried me alive." Her mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "God forbid. Why would they do such a thing?" "Because they were jealous," Amarachi whispered. "Because they couldn't stand the thought of me leaving for a better life." Her mother shook her head in disbelief. "My daughter, we must tell the elders. We must tell the chief." But Amarachi's heart burned with something stronger than justice. She didn't just want them exposed, she wanted them to feel the fear, the helplessness she had felt beneath the earth. She wanted revenge. By afternoon, word had spread through the village, Amarachi was alive. People gathered outside her home, whispering in shock, staring at her as if she were a spirit. Some were afraid to approach her, fearing she had returned from the dead. But among the crowd, 3 faces turned pale. Chinelo. Ifeoma. Ngozi. They stood frozen, their eyes wide with horror. "This is impossible," Chinelo murmured under her breath, gripping Ifeoma's arm. "We buried her. We saw her body." Ngozi swallowed hard, her fingers trembling. "Then how is she standing there?" Amarachi stepped forward, her gaze locking onto them. A slow, knowing smile crept across her lips. "You thought you could kill me," she said, her voice low but strong. "You thought I would stay buried." The villagers turned to look at Chinelo, Ifeoma, and Ngozi, murmuring among themselves. "What is she talking about?" someone asked. "They were the last people seen with her," another whispered. Sweat dripped down Ifeoma's forehead. "She's lying," she burst out. "She's trying to frame us." Amarachi took another step toward them, tilting her head. "Lying," she repeated softly. Then, in a voice that sent chills down everyone's spine, she said, "If I'm lying, then why do you all look so afraid?" The 3 girls stiffened. Ngozi opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Amarachi turned to the crowd. "I was buried alive. They left me for dead. But God said my time was not up." She raised her hand, showing her fingers, still caked with dirt from the grave. "I dug myself out of the earth with these hands. I crawled back from the land of the dead. And now, I have returned." The villagers gasped. Some took a step back, making the sign of the cross. A loud voice broke through the murmurs. "Take them to the chief," an elder commanded. "Let the gods decide their fate." Chinelo, Ifioma, and Ngozi turned to run, but strong hands grabbed them. The villagers dragged them forward, their screams piercing the air. Amarachi stood still, watching them struggle, watching fear consume them just as they had wanted fear to consume her. But she wasn't done yet. Not even close. The village square was packed by evening, the air tense with anticipation. The elder sat in a semicircle before the towering figure of the village chief, his eyes sharp as he observed the trembling girls before him. A sacred fire burned in the center of the square, casting flickering shadows across the anxious faces of the villagers. Amarachi sat beside her mother, her body still weak but her spirit burning with purpose. She had not spoken another word since her accusation. There was no need. The weight of truth had already begun its work. The chief cleared his throat, his deep voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Amarachi, you claim these girls tried to kill you." A hush fell over the gathering. Amarachi stood slowly, her bruises visible even in the dim firelight. She raised her chin, looking at the three girls who had once been her friends. "They did not try, my chief," she said, her voice steady. "They buried me alive." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some women clutched their chests, whispering prayers. The chief's face darkened. He turned to the accused. "Chinelo, Ifioma, Ngozi. What do you say?" Chinelo dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "My chief. This is madness. We did not do this." "Yes, we were with her that night," Ifioma stammered. "But she left us, saying she had a secret to attend to." Ngozi, the quietest of the three, was shaking violently. "She's lying. She must have run away and now she wants to punish us." A long silence followed. Then, a slow, deliberate clap echoed through the square. It was Amarachi. She stepped forward, tilting her head as she looked at them. "You still have the strength to lie?" she asked, her voice almost amused. "Even now." Chinelo opened her mouth to argue, but Amarachi cut her off. "Tell me, if you are innocent." She slowly lifted her right hand, her fingers covered in dried blood and dirt. "Then why are my hands like this?" Ngozi let out a strangled sob. "Tell me, if I ran away, who dug me out of my grave?" Amarachi's voice rose, filled with something beyond anger, something raw, something chilling. Ifioma let out a choked gasp, her knees buckling. "Enough," the chief bellowed. He turned to the village's oldest elder, a woman named Mama Adalai, known for her wisdom and connection to the gods. "What do you see in this matter?" Mama Adalai stood, leaning heavily on her carved staff. She walked toward Amarachi and looked deep into her eyes, searching. Then she turned to the A. "We will be stopping here. If you love this video and want to watch the continuation, like, subscribe and comment, yes, I want it. We will release it soon. Thank you."